Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Stu Kaplan. I am a financial services executive, and I've had PKD for 20 years, at least that I've known of it. As of the last year, I've been made a member of the board of trustees of the PKD Foundation, and that's why I'm here to introduce this panel. As many of you know, the PKD Foundation is committed to creating a world free of PKD, and that is our ultimate goal. Since our founding, the foundation has funded over 1,300 research projects and more than 50 million for PKD research. We're committed to fulfilling our vision of ending PKD. As the largest private funder of the early stage PKD science, we set researchers up for future funding and advanced discoveries in PKD research. No one understands the PKD Foundation's commitment to research better than Chief Research Officer Dr. Chris Rusconi and Director of Research Elise Hoover. They're joining us today to discuss the ADPKD Registry, the first nationwide database of patients with ADPKD and PKD clinical studies. Both the registry and the clinical studies are key in finding new treatments and a cure for PKD. Also here today is Dr. Michael Mrugh. He's a professor of medicine at the Division of Nephrology at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, UAB, where he trains the next generation of physicians and scientists and co-directs their PKD clinic. He's an expert when it comes to the world of clinical trials for PKD. Since 2009, he's overseen UAB's clinical PKD research activities, including the CRISP study and the REPRISE clinical trial. Outcomes of this trial played a crucial role in the FDA approval of tolvaptan. Panel, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Stu, and hi, everybody, and thank you for being here today. I'm Chris Rusconi, the Chief Research Officer of the Foundation, and in this session, what the three of us will do as follows. I'll provide some information related to participation in clinical trials and background on clinical trials. Then I'll pass it over to Dr. Mrugh, who'll provide an overview of clinical trials in the PKD space, and then Elise will provide a detailed update on our ADPKD registry. And so in the next 10-ish minutes or so, I'll touch on three topics: the background on what clinical trials are, what participation in clinical trials looks like, and then throughout, I'll talk about why participation in clinical trials is so important. So if we go to the next slide, Elise. This is a slide of the industry-sponsored pipeline, and Michael will provide a dive into these studies during his discussion. The points I want to make on this slide and the next is that the PKD pipeline continues to grow, for which we're quite grateful. And that's due to the ongoing collaboration between patients like you, between our industry and academic sponsors of these clinical studies and clinical trialists. And if we go to the next slide, in addition to the industry-sponsored studies, there are a number of other academic-sponsored studies evaluating both drug repurposing and other non-drug interventions for PKD, some of which the Foundation is sponsoring, particularly in the area of diet and nutrition. So now we'll start talking. Yeah, thanks, Elise. There's two broad types of clinical studies that are outlined here. There's observational studies, and these are studies where researchers analyze health data to find links between, diagnosis, disease progression, symptoms, or quality of life. A great example of an observational study is the ADPKD Registry. And then there's interventional studies, and these are studies in which the sponsors are testing new ways to prevent, detect, or treat diseases, and that intervention can take many forms. Most often we think of these as drug interventions, but they can be diet and lifestyle interventions. They can be device interventions. So if we go to the next slide, clinical trials, real basic level, are human studies of new treatments or therapies. It's how we understand whether an intervention, we test it to ensure that it's both safe and effective. And we think about the role of patients in clinical trials. It's super important because one of the largest challenges in facing particularly drug development for PKD is under enrollment in studies. That under enrollment takes two forms. One is failure to recruit enough volunteers to complete the study. And then a similar but different form it takes is really failure to recruit patients quickly enough to make study completion feasible. And so, as I'll say throughout this, the role of you, the patients in drug development is extremely important, and we're always grateful when you participate. If we could go, thank you, the next slide. So we've begun using the registry to help connect patients enrolled in clinical studies. And as part of that, we've asked about what your motivation is for participating. And here's what we've learned. I think the majority of patients, and the most important takeaway is that folks participate in studies to contribute to advancing science and treatment. So very altruistic reasons, but there's also other really important reasons patients participate, and that includes access to specialists and the opportunity to try innovative treatments as major reasons. And so while you're not always necessarily going to benefit from participating in clinical trials, there are definitely some benefits from participating in clinical studies. So Elise, we go to the next slide. Many of you have likely heard somebody say, like, this is a fill in the blank phase clinical study. And so what we want to do on this slide is give a quick overview of what the purpose is of these different phases of clinical studies. So we'll start on the left with phase 1 studies. These are generally small studies. If it's a drug treatment, this would be the first time the drug's been tested in humans. And the primary role of these studies is to gain an understanding of safety. Again, if it's a drug study, to get an idea of what the appropriate dose might be, and to get that first understanding of how the drug behaves in humans. And if nothing untoward happens in a phase 1 study, treatments will often then advance into phase 2 studies. And phase 2 studies are not always, but often the first time a drug is studied in the patient population for which it's intended to be used. These studies, we consider them moderate in size, and they're really designed primarily to gain an understanding of the drug safety in the intended patient population, but they're also generally designed to get early signs of efficacy to help the sponsor determine if a drug should be studied further and taken into phase 3 studies. Now, phase 3 studies are the ones we hear most about. These are typically large studies. They're designed to demonstrate that a drug is effective in treating a disease and to further understand the safety of the drug, again, in the target patient population. And it's the results of these phase 3 studies that are submitted to the FDA for review in determining whether a drug should be approved to treat disease based upon the balance of its effectiveness in treating the disease versus the safety, again, in the target patient population. And not always, but in some instances, studies called phase 4 studies will be conducted after a drug's approved, and these are generally conducted to further demonstrate the efficacy of a drug. So now let's transition into what participation in a clinical trial looks like. So now the first step in participation is informed consent. This is where you, the patient, learn from the study personnel exactly what being in a trial will look like so that you can decide from a position of truly being informed if you want to participate in a study or not. Now, consent forms should include all of the following things listed here, and importantly, they must include the procedures you'll undergo and the risk for participation, along with other important details. If we go to the next slide, Elise, thank you. Now, another key consideration for study participation is whether you're eligible for the study based upon what we call eligibility criteria. And these are basically the characteristics that must be shared by all participants. Some examples are shown here, like age, diagnosis, medical history, current kidney function, current medications. And sometimes these will get very detailed in terms of the medical information being asked. And that's because treatment studies often require that patients have a particular risk of progression or stage of PKD in order to participate. And, I suspect that from the patient perspective, oftentimes these eligibility criteria can be frustrating if they prevent you from participating in a trial. But they are really important because these criteria are how researchers ensure that the results from the studies will be due to what is under the control of the study. And that helps researchers achieve accurate and meaningful results. So now let's talk about what expectations look like if you choose to participate. And I think the main takeaway from this slide is the biggest commitment is your time. Studies require your time for a variety of reasons. They can be checkups, they can be visits to the clinic for urine tests, and throughout the study, there's going to be procedures to monitor if the treatment is working and if it's safe. And so really being able to commit your time is critical because the best way to get good results from a study is for all participants to fully complete the study visits and tests so that the trial results in a complete data set. Now, that being said, it's always important to remember as a patient that participation is voluntary. If at any time you no longer want to be in a study, you have the right to remove yourself from the study, and you can just reach out to your study team and they'll help you leave the study safely. Speaking of safety, let's talk about risk. So every clinical trial is different. And remember that basically, as we talked about with informed consent, the researchers are required to tell you all the possible known risks before you agree to participate. Now, typical risks include these things like known possible risks like side effects of the medication or the treatment being studied. They also include unwanted events during the trial that may or may not be related to the study drug. And then the one universal risk that every study has is the failure of the treatment to work. Now, that being said, keep in mind that the research team will continuously monitor your health and safety throughout the trial, whether you are receiving the study drug or treatment, or whether you've been assigned to receive a placebo or a sugar pill. We flip to the next slide. Thanks, Elise. So this is really important. So study sponsors understand that when you participate in the study, you place great trust in them and in sharing your data as part of participating. So they protect your identity and your data rigorously. So if we look up in the top left corner, first, when you consent, you're assigned a unique study ID, and all of your personal identification at that point is separated from your study ID, and that personal identification information is placed in a secure location. Then when it comes time to actually start participating in the study, all the data that's collected from you is only identified by your unique study ID. This is what we call de-identified data. This data is also stored in a secure location. And again, the secure location where your data is stored is separate from the secure location where your personal information is stored. And then finally, when data from studies are analyzed, only the de-identified data is analyzed. The people doing the analysis can't relate that data to you directly as a person. And now there are members of the study team who are able to connect your identification with the study data, but they only rarely do that, and it's only in usually fairly unusual circumstances, and that's usually for safety reasons. So generally, your information, your personal information and data are never going to be connected to each other. So now if we just go to the last slide, so I wrap up this portion, I want to share this slide to highlight that the development of treatments is really a collaboration. It's between researchers, basic scientists, between patients, between collaborative groups like PKDOC, between clinical scientists, the trialists, and the clinical study sponsors. And so in the case of tolvaptan, many years ago, researchers, including our founder, Dr. Jared Grantham, developed data in animals that indicated that suppressing vasopressin may be a potential treatment for PKD, ADPKD. And that was really the critical start to this journey. After that, greater than a decade of clinical studies, some of which are highlighted on this slide, were conducted that highlighted, that I think to me and to all of us, I think highlight the incredible commitment of patients in terms of both the absolute numbers of you who volunteer to participate in these studies, as well as the time required for your participation. And that commitment really fueled and facilitated the development of this treatment. And so the message I want to leave you with is you are all essential to the development of treatments for PKD. And so with that, I want to hand the session over to Dr. Michael Mrugh, who, among other hats, chairs the Scientific Advisory Committee of the Foundation.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rusconi, for this excellent introduction to this topic. I'll just follow up with providing specific examples of which drugs and therapeutic interventions are currently tested in ADPKD and ARPKD. Next slide. Thank you. So this is the slide that you have seen in Dr. Rusconi's presentation. It basically shows that the tolvaptan is the drug that has been approved by FDA, and there are several additional drugs that are in the pipeline. What I'll do is I'll cover first those that are most advanced, and we'll tell you about those that are still recruiting patients and those that completed recruitment. And I'll move from those that are in more advanced phases of clinical testing to those that are in less advanced testing. Phases of testing. Elise, next slide. So the first drug I would like to mention is actually not on that list, and it's the venglustat that was studied under the staged PKD clinical trial. And this study was discontinued earlier this month due to futility. There was no dangerous side effect. The safety profile remained the same as at the beginning of the trial. It was discontinued due to futility because the preliminary analysis of available data strongly suggested that this investigational therapy will not impact favorably the disease progression. So the study was closed, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank everybody who participated in this study. So thank you. So the drug that is currently tested is bardoxolone methyl. It targets the NRF2 pathway. It's a phase 3 study of safety and efficacy of this drug. The study is recruiting total 550 participants. They're looking for patients with ADPKD that are 18 to 70 years old and have eGFR or renal function 30 to 90 milliliters per minute. Also for this study, the patients cannot participate if they use tolvaptan or had kidney transplant. And this concurrent use of other therapeutics, it's usually an exclusion criterion for most of these studies that I'll discuss today. So I will not mention that during my presentation. Next. The next drug that is being investigated in ADPKD is lixivaptan. This drug is similar with its structure to tolvaptan, that is the FDA-approved therapeutic for ADPKD. However, it's believed that it may have less severe liver toxicity. So the study is now looking to recruit 50 participants that have ADPKD and previously had adverse effects to taking tolvaptan in terms of liver toxicity. These participants should be 18 to 65 years old and have eGFR or more than 20. Next. Next is a phase 2 study. There are no more phase 3 studies. The phase 2 study was only with tesevatinib in ADPKD and ARPKD. Both of these studies are fully enrolled, and hopefully the results will be coming soon. Okay. Next is a compound that has this name RGLS4326. This compound targets microRNA MER17 that controls gene expression of several cystogenic genes, including PKD1 and PKD2. And it's a phase 1 study with that is recruiting 27 participants that are 18 to 70 years old with diagnosis of ADPKD and eGFR 30 to 90. Not too long ago, earlier this month, I believe that there was a press release by the by this sponsor of this study on 9 study participants, and it appeared that there were some favorable outcomes. So next study is looking at the effects of curcumin, which is a dietary supplement, or this is one of the compounds in turmeric that is used for flavorings. And this study is looking at the effects of curcumin on the function of blood vessels. This study is fully enrolled, so we are waiting for the outcomes. Next slide. The next study that is also fully enrolled is the study of metformin. And the metformin is a compound that has been approved by FDA for use for control of type 2 diabetes. And it has been studied in ADPKD actually in 2 different clinical trials. One, a multi-institutional TAME PKD trial, and then independently in a clinical study at University of Colorado. So I mentioned these both studies were fully enrolled. We are waiting for outcomes. Next slide. So the next study is looking at the effects of pravastatin, which is an FDA-approved therapeutic for hypercholesterolemia. The study is still recruiting. Total of 200 participants are needed at age 25 to 60 years with ADPKD and eGFR in range in eGFR greater than 45 milliliters per minute. Next, the effects of caloric restriction or time-restricted feeding or intermittent fasting, how it's called as well, at University of Colorado in Denver, is looking at effects of time-restricted feeding. The study that is listed here, is looking at 30 participants, but there will be a new study starting there that is looking for over 120 participants, basically looking at similar criteria, 18 to 65 years old with ADPKD and eGFR more than 30, but there's an additional restriction. These patients that want to participate in this study should have body mass index that is more than 27. Okay. Another study that is looking at the effects of caloric restriction is going on in Germany and looking basically at intervention that leads to ketosis. Total of 63 participants are needed for this study. They're looking for patients 18 to 65 years old with ADPKD and eGFR more than 30. Next, so for autosomal recessive polycystic kidney disease, there are several studies that are open to participation, and they include several databases or registries that are for ARPKD and ARPKD-related diseases, novel imaging in ARPKD in Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, novel MRI techniques to evaluate ARPKD, kidney and liver disease progression at Cleveland Children's, and then the role of tolvaptan in ARPKD. Next. And also, I would like to mention for patients that reached end-stage kidney disease and that had kidney transplant, there is this opportunity to participate in Freedom 1 transplant study. It's not PKD specific, but PKD patients may participate, looking for 240 participants that are more than old, and they had their first kidney transplant. Okay, there are multiple additional studies, and that include the registries or looking at specific pathways or specific manifestations of polycystic kidney diseases. And just, I'm not going to go over this list, but I'll tell you that you can find a lot more information and in details on the clinical study tool that was generated by the PKD Foundation, and you can find it on the PKD Foundation's website. That's all what I had to say. I'll just let Elise Hoover to continue, please.
Hi, everyone. So now that we've heard from Dr. Mrugh about some of the clinical trials in the pipeline, I'd like to share with you some details of the Foundation's own project. So what I'll do is go through and talk to you about the patient registry, tell you about how we try to return value to participants, and then also talk some more about some of the tools we've created to help connect you to research. So first of all, what is a registry? It is a collection of individuals with a given disease. So in this case, autosomal dominant PKD. And there are some similarities and differences between the clinical trials you've heard about. So clinical trial, you saw that you're limited by those inclusion-exclusion criteria. They ultimately close and stop enrolling patients. And they also have very clearly predefined research questions that they're trying to answer in the study. However, a registry, we put very little limits on who can participate. So anyone who has ADPKD can join regardless of age or kidney function. We also don't intend to close enrollment, so we hope that the number of people who participate will continue to grow. And we also have the flexibility that we can add new research questions as we go, as we think of new outcomes that we'd like to study. But one very important thing that is similar is that participant data is separate from identifiable information like patient name, address, email, contact information. We take that very seriously, similar to a clinical trial. Now, you may already be enrolled in a registry. Traditionally, this is a clinic-based registry at an academic medical center. And what you would do is fill out a consent form to authorize the study doctors to look at your electronic health record. And they can look at research questions based on your labs, your test results, and other things. What we've done is we've created what we're calling a patient-powered registry. So we're getting data directly from patients. And because we are getting data that way, we rely on participants to continue to engage with us. So to keep coming back, filling out our modules, and telling us about their disease experience so that we can see how that changes over time. And that also means that we get to collect really unique data, like quality of life, that you can't get from a medical record. So the Foundation in 2019 launched our ADPKD Registry, and we asked anyone in the US with ADPKD to join. It's hosted on an online platform, and there are two goals. The first, of course, is to create a tool to better understand the disease in the lives of patients. But the second goal is to help connect patients to clinical trials for which they may be eligible, which we can tell by looking at their answers to our surveys. So I'll tell you more about that in a minute. I do want to say that in the Foundation's history, we've traditionally funded research. And this is the first time that we have created a program to do our own research. So we're really excited about this program. And especially with the COVID environment from the last year and a half, it's been really valuable to have something that people can participate in remotely. And ultimately, the mission of this program is to advance research, help find therapies and a cure for PKD, but really using the patient voice to do that. So you saw this slide before. Dr. Rusconi presented this for a clinical trial, and we follow the same procedures. So once someone signs up for the registry, we separate their personal information from their data in the portal, and we use IQVIA. And their whole job is to do these kinds of things and store this data safely and confidentially. So we assign everyone a unique ID, and all their answers to our questions are recorded by that ID. And similar to a clinical trial, let's get rid of this. Similar to a clinical trial, only very specific instances will someone be connected to their personal information. For example, if someone's locked out of their account, then I will be able to connect them, but we make sure we do that only in very specific circumstances. Okay, so this is some baseline characteristics of people who signed up. We have over 2,000 who have agreed to participate, which is really fantastic. And they are from a wide range of disease stages, from early disease through post-transplant. And one of our goals in this next year is to work to invite participants to join to create a racially and gender diversity that matches the PKD patients in the community itself. So we can make sure that when we're answering these questions, we have a good representative sample of people to make sure we know what that disease looks like. So I mentioned that the second goal of the registry is to connect patients to trials. So the way we do that, as soon as you sign up, the first module we ask you to fill out is a core questionnaire. And that tells us things like latest kidney function, age, symptoms, things that are common eligibility criteria, like you saw in those studies that Dr. Murag highlighted. And so when we have a study that we'd like to share, we can look at everyone in the registry and see who might match those eligibility criteria, and then send them information about the study. One really important thing here is that we want to leave the power in that individual's hands to participate. So we don't share their names, their contact information with a study sponsor. We just give the patient details about the study, and then it's up to them if they want to reach out and participate. Oh, and in the first year and a half, we've connected patients with 5 different studies, which is really exciting. So I mentioned to you that we wanted to be intentional in returning value to participants who are enrolling in this program with us. So one of the things we've done, everyone who joins has an individual portal where they will log in and answer our questions. And we have a dashboard tab. And on this dashboard, we show some of the data we're learning. And we also try to highlight that individual's answer compared to everyone else in the registry so they can see how their answers compare. And we change this up a couple times a year to keep it fresh. We also do quarterly newsletters. So this is a little more detail about what we're learning and most importantly, why it matters. And we also talk about what's coming up next, talk about what we're excited about with the program, and just share a little more with everyone who's participating about what we're learning. And then we also plan to publish an annual report every year. This was our first report. We put it out in March of this year, and we went into a lot more detail about the research questions that we're thinking about on the data we're learning. But one thing that was really exciting for me are the participant testimonials. So that not only highlights some of the patient voice, but also shares with everyone why we're so excited about this work, why it's so impactful and important to understand some of this about the patient journey. So if anyone is interested in signing up, this is our homepage for the registry on the Foundation's website. You would go to sign in. There's a first time to the registry. Click there. And we have 4 windows we ask you to fill out to complete your sign up. So we ask for your name and your email and a unique password. We ask for your date of birth, your diagnosis. We ask about your contact information so we know where in the US you are located. And then we have our consent form. So this details what it looks like to participate in the registry. It is pretty small, no matter the size of your monitor. So I recommend downloading or printing a copy so you can really read what this program looks like and understand what you're getting yourself into. And then you would register. There is one last step. You would need to confirm your email so we know it's you, and then you are officially enrolled in the registry. The Foundation also has an Act Alert program. So this is an email list where we ask for where you live. And then once we know that the new study has popped up in your area, we'll send you information about that study. You get an email, it looks like this. We tell you what's important about that study, and what eligibility looks like, and then how to reach out to the study team. As Dr. Mugg pointed out, we also have our clinical studies tool. So what we do, if you click on Find a Study on that page, it'll take you to a list of questions, and you can fill this out or not. But what it does is it helps filter the studies that are available for ones that might be more appropriate or interesting to you. So you can tell us about your diagnosis, your transplant status, your age, your current kidney function. And then the website will pull up studies that you may qualify for. And when you click on each study, you can find out more about what is involved, what the eligibility are, and how to sign up. So speaking from the foundation and for all the researchers doing this work, they could not do it without the people who sign up to participate. So thank you so much. Thank you for attending. This is the contact information for our research team here at the foundation, as well as my private email address. And hopefully we can answer some questions for you now.
Someone included me here, but it looks like we have a bunch of questions that I can leave to the panel to discuss.
Excellent. Let's actually start out. I have a few. So Dr. Mugg, can you share with us why it takes so long for to get results from a clinical trial?
Well, so first the patient needs to be, all the data need to be completed. And then it's necessary to clean the data. So to look, are there any technical errors within the data, let's say with the data entry, and make sure, that all the data is clean and these errors have been identified. So after this is completed, then it's necessary to go basically through rigorous statistical analyses and try to look at different aspects of that analysis. So there are some primary objectives of the study and secondary objectives of the study. So all these need to be evaluated and needs to be looked at the context of some potential modifiers as well to be able to interpret the data well. And then once the results are available, it's necessary to review them with appropriate committees before the data actually may be released and published. So this is why, it's a lot of work to do after the completion of the study before actually the data is analyzed and ready to be shared with everybody.
Excellent. And also for everyone listening, the foundation tries to keep up on these results as they come out. We have a web page called our treatment pipeline. Check it out. Now, Dr. Asconi, could you talk about what it means for the eligibility criteria, for example, for kidney function, once a therapy is approved? Does that mean that only the people who fit those eligibility criteria can now take that drug?
I mean, the not simple answer is not necessarily. Oops, I'm getting a lot of echo. So basically, think of the practice of medicine. If the drug is approved, a physician has the right to prescribe that drug to whomever they see the drug fit. However, in the coverage for insurance and in thinking about the use of that medicine, particularly if, say, the lower limits of kidney function are going to generally define whether a drug is safe and whether there's sufficient safety data in a person who has low EGFR for a drug to be prescribed, because that can often, kidney function, depending on how the drug is removed from your body, may lead to the drug accumulating in your body. So it's really important that the drug have been studied in a patient who has a kidney function in the range in which it's being prescribed. Does that answer? In a circular way, that is, I think, the answer to your question.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent. And Dr. Mugg, could you talk about why tolvaptan is an exclusion criteria?
Well, I think, yeah, so the question is why not to take tolvaptan? Why you cannot take or shouldn't take tolvaptan for studies that are looking at therapeutic intervention? So that's a very good question. And of course, like, it might be interesting to answer, whether taking tolvaptan and doing that other intervention adds, additional benefit. But first, it's important to determine if this candidate therapeutic compound has therapeutic benefits alone. And for that, it's necessary to exclude additional potential modifiers of the outcome. And certainly tolvaptan, as an FDA-approved therapeutic, is one of them. So we may expect that once we have more therapeutic compounds that are approved for ADPKD, one may start to look, what happens if you take both of them. Do you get additive benefit? Yes or no? But until then, the 12-10 will remain the exclusion criteria for enrollment to therapeutic studies. And like often it's, that once patients took 12-10, it doesn't mean they cannot participate ever. Often there is a limitation, let's say for patients that took 12-10, they need to stay off maybe for 3 months, but it may differ from study to study.
Excellent. Dr. Rasconi, can you talk about why it's important that these clinical trials enroll a diverse cohort of people and what some of those challenges are?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the most important reason is that when clinical trials are being run, basically the goal is to collect data to understand whether the drug is safe or effective in use in a given person. And so the only way to understand whether they're safe and effective for a given person is to have a trial that's as representative possible as the patient population, so that we know that there aren't differences in how the drug's efficacy, how the drug's metabolized as a function of someone's race or ethnicity, basically. And so that's why it's really critically important, because there are some drugs that have different effects in people who say are identified as white versus people who identify as Black or African American. The real challenges there are challenges we face oftentimes in the delivery of medicine, which is creating trust in communities of color and trust in groups that are underrepresented, so that they're willing to participate in clinical clinical
Great point. Here's a question here that I can take. So we're wondering if clinical trial recruitment changes in the US based on if there is a local PKD chapter or support group nearby. And it's hard to track that because, again, the information is de-identified. And so we don't want to make sure we're pointing out where patients live who were enrolled in these studies. But one thing that's exciting about the registry is that as we recruit more people to participate and we understand where the ADPKD patients live in the country, we can help inform those drug studies to put clinical study sites in those areas. So we can make sure that we're putting the studies where the patients are. Okay. All right. We have a question about what the pre-phase 1 pipeline looks like. Do we know how many people are currently doing preclinical studies right now at ADPKD or ARPKD?
I can start, Michael. That's an interesting question. So I think that it's almost impossible to know the work that's going on inside of either a private or public biotech company until they disclose a drug candidate. That being said, and at least an interesting data point is we had a polycystic kidney disease outcomes consortium regulatory summit last month that had about 40% of the participants were from industry, and I think they came from 22 different companies. And so I think it's a fair assumption to say that if people spent 2 days at a meeting, they are probably working in the PKD space. So I'd say use that as maybe the benchmark. Minimally, there's in the low 20s. And I don't know, Michael, if you have any additional thoughts there.
Well, I absolutely agree. It's difficult to say because you see only basically the tip of the iceberg, right? So, but I think that I would encourage you to look, for example, at the PKD Foundation website and look at the investigators that were funded by the PKD Foundation. And this is like for most of those grants, still they are sort of in this preclinical phase of studies. And you can get an idea and flavor of what type of grants, are, judged by review committees as most meritorious and funded by the foundation.
Dr. Moran, could you also talk about why we often see pregnant or breastfeeding women excluded from studies?
Yeah, so the major concern is that if these are new compounds that are being tested in humans without a lot of experience, it remains unknown what effects there might be on the developing baby. And a lot of times, if the drug is safe for adult, it may not be safe in the early development. And one of those drugs that are commonly used is, for example, ACE inhibitor group of drugs like lisinopril or fosinopril that we try to stop when somebody tries to conceive. So, so if we do a clinical trial, typically we are not aware of potential toxicities, and the toxicities in mouse or lack of toxicities in mouse or rat doesn't necessarily mean lack of toxicity in humans. And this is why there is a strong attempt to basically exclude, at least in initial phases of clinical testing, the patients that are pregnant or could become pregnant. And the same, is for breastfeeding.
Great. All right, another question I'm going to take. So we have some interest in mental health impact of PKD on an individual. So the registry, one of the quality of life modules we have, it's called the ADPKD Impact Scale. It was developed by a really fantastic group of researchers who wanted to understand fatigue, social, and emotional impacts of the disease on an individual. So we have incorporated that into the registry, and we ask all participants to fill that out 4 times a year, so quarterly. And the idea is to follow someone over time and as their disease progresses and see how those answers change. So that's one way that we're starting to really look at that and understand what that impact looks like in patients. I think we're almost up on time. Dr. Rusconi, anything else you'd like to add?
I mean, I think the main thing to just add is just again to say thank you for all who are participating, and just to let you know that really you're probably the most important, or one of the 2 most important parts of developing the pipeline. There's the science and then there's the people participating. And so just please consider participating in clinical trials if the opportunity presents itself.
Dr. Murag, any last comments?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Dr. Rusconi and what you said about the importance of patient, and the participants. And but I would say that it's basically that finally, ADPKD patients are empowered actually to change their future by participation in these studies, or their close ones. And I think with a lot of times when you try to participate in clinical study, you are restricted by the inclusion and exclusion criteria. The thing that the registry offers is basically for everyone with PKD can participate, and empowers everyone to change the future. So I would encourage you at least to, everyone to at least look at the registry and see what it can offer to you.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, we're really excited by that program. I do want to add as well that, I know that this presentation was pretty ADPKD heavy. The treatment pipeline for AR is a little behind, and we do have a few studies that we've listed that we would love for you to look at and consider. And we all do our part to support that research. And if you have any questions about what participating looks like, or any of our foundation research programs or tools, please reach out to us. And thanks everyone so much for attending.
Well, thank you, Elise and Michael and Chris, for that wonderful presentation.